Well,
in the
what's your
Democratic Party.
opponent? What's your opponent like? Let's get back to your district. What's your opponent like?
Wow. Could not be more different in perspective from me. My opponent has no real interest in talking to people or in responding to the needs of his entire district. He wants to appeal only to a partisan base. And that's all he does. He doesn't.
Is he a Republican or?
He's a Republican.
Okay.
Ken Calvert has been in there since 1993. He actually won his seat in the first election I could vote in, which is just insane. But so this is his 28th year in office. He's a conservative Republican, well, conservative in air quotes, because a lot of conservatives are not really conservative anymore. But basically 98% funded by corporations, mostly from the military-industrial complex, which means it's unsurprising that he votes for every single war. He has one of the most authoritarian voting records, in Congress, and has pulled rights from us in tons of ways. He's constantly been voting for things like warrantless wiretapping and unlimited surveillance of American citizens, crap like that. But he flies below the radar because he doesn't do public appearances. He doesn't show up in the media. So most people in this country have never heard of the guy. A lot of people in the district only know him from the tacky orange signs he throws up every 2 years for his reelection. But the last time he did any kind of town hall was 10 years ago, and it was a heavily scripted affair. He doesn't show up and do anything. He completely takes for granted a Republican base. There's a lot of Republicans in this area who can't stand the guy, but he's
Have you reached them? I mean,
yeah,
have you had? How's that gone?
Quite a few, and that's the thing. If you could get money behind candidates that are willing to do that work and talk to people, and again try to get past the partisan rhetoric and just talk about the issues, then we could win tons of seats. This again gets back to the strategic issue. A lot of the donor class that's behind the parties are not really interested in doing that. They don't want to dump money into that. If we could do it, we could win tons of people over. I've had tons of actual Republicans and conservative independents come on board with the campaign, oftentimes like as hardcore supporters, because they know that we're going to disagree on tons of issues, but I'm always going to listen to them and I'm going to take them seriously and come back.
Well, let me interject here because I'm curious about that. When you say like we're going to disagree on tons of issues, well, what about? I mean, were you able to kind of build a bridge on some issues as well, though?
Yes. Yeah, you'd have to. And that, again, gets back to a strategic difference. If you're willing to talk about things that have bipartisan appeal, a stronger economy has bipartisan appeal. Anti-corruption has bipartisan appeal. Ending wars has bipartisan appeal. If you're able to focus on issues where there is overlap, I mean, hell, it's not a coincidence that Trump ran on crap like Drain the Swamp and had that pretend outsider thing. He appointed more lobbyists than any administration has ever. But he ran against the lobbyists and is still pretending that that's what he's doing. He's lying his ass off in doing it. But the idea is appealing to a lot of people. So I took the fact that Trump won this district by like 12 points as an opportunity to try and appeal to a lot of those voters to whom some of the economic populism and the anti-corruption and the anti-intervention stuff would all appeal to. And
what about healthcare in that scenario? Because I mean, there was that Fox News poll. Like even folks on the right are open to a Medicare for all now.
And
speak to some of your experience there.
Yeah, the key is all in the framing. Because I run into Democrats who are opposed to it until we have a conversation about it because of the way they've heard it framed before, and tons of Republicans. As long as they think of it as a government takeover and the government taking away their freedom, they're hardcore opposed. As soon as you explain what it actually does, they're like, oh, damn. Yeah, I'm totally for that. That makes sense. And if you tell somebody that this policy is going to put $10,000 of your own money back in your wallet that's currently being taxed away from you, because the way a lot of people in this area too, especially the more middle class conservative voters, they'll get insurance from their employer, but their employer is probably paying like $15,000 for that policy, and a Medicare for all is going to cost like $2,000 to the employer and $2,000 to you. So where's the extra $11,000 go? It's part of your compensation package that you agreed to when you took the job. As long as the legislation is written well enough to include that, then they can't keep it, which means you just got an $11,000 raise. And if you tell somebody that you have more freedom to see people that you want to see as the doctors or whatever, and a lot of people, they can't separate insurance from their provider. It's like the same thing for them. If you can make that distinction, say you have more freedom, and I'm going to put 11 grand of your own money back in your wallet, a lot of conservatives, they'll sign up for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also the angle that it's like, well, it helps, the small businesses. I mean, that's something the right always, sends the signal out for small businesses. And then when you look into it, right-wing ideology in the contemporary American sense actually kills small businesses.
Of course,
it is the total opposite of helping small businesses. And
they want to help out the massive multinationals.
Right.
My incumbent does that a lot. He runs on support for small businesses. That's his thing. His base is like the local chamber of commerce. They're the only people he talks to regularly at all. But his policies are disastrous for small businesses. And you can occasionally catch him even slipping. There was a talk recently he gave to a chamber of commerce that somebody recorded. And there's a line in there about the relief because of the pandemic. And he's like, yeah, I know a lot of restaurant owners, they're just not going to make it. And that's really unfortunate. So we should pray for them. I'm like, screw that. We should be giving money to support small businesses and money to workers so they keep spending money. And we should have paid for the changes businesses had to make in order to stay open safely, like the like the plexiglasses and all that kind of crap. We should have been investing in small businesses in Main Street and in the workers. And that would help. He's just, I don't care, but he still gets to run as if he's the one who wants to support small business. And it bothers me on so many ways that Democrats cede ground to the Republicans on things like the economy and small business because we're not as willing to talk about economics. When we were, and we focused more on Main Street and on the workers, we dominated a large chunk of that. It's not like rural areas were any less socially conservative 60 years ago than they are now. They were socially conservative then, and they're socially conservative now. We still won those votes when our focus was on the economy.
See, when you say we, this is where I feel like you're describing a club that doesn't want you as a member and doesn't exist anymore as you know it. I mean,
yeah. But it's not like there aren't other FDR Democrats in the party right now. And the fact is, I'm running as a Democrat.
No, I get it. I get it. I understand.
But
I understand.
But yeah, the mainstream is clearly not in sync with what I'm talking about. But if we can get back to that, is my point. If we can get enough of these New Deal style Democrats running, we could take back those swing voters. Leave the hardcore nationalists and racists or whatever. If they want to keep pandering to that, they can have them. We need the swing voters who are motivated more by the corruption, the economy, the interventions. Those are all people we could take.
You need the people who don't vote too. You need the people who don't vote because they don't really feel like there's an option on the ballot for them.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the people that you need to get. And that's why, an argument I would make is that the Democratic, and when I say Democrat, I mean the establishment. I don't mean people like you that are trying to break in. I mean the establishment. Their first concern is not winning. Because if it was, they would do all the things you just talked about. And they would have been doing it since 90. They would have learned their lesson. They would have been like, okay, Clinton was sort of like an anomaly thing that spoke to this contemporary moment.
Not an anomaly.
We're not going to.
Won with only 43% of the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
That was also a lesson, but they weren't interested. It bothers me that people have continued to double down on that DLC crap.
Right.
Even though he won with 43% of the vote. If there wasn't that populist Perot candidacy, there's no chance he would have won.
That's a good point. So I would say that at the end of the day, it's like we need to keep the donor class happy. If we beat a Republican or two in the process, cool. If not, no biggie, because we're keeping the donor class happy. And I think it's hard to dispute that, because if that wasn't the case, we'd be talking about Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware. It is the reality that we face right now, and it's the reason that I would not expect help from the DCCC. No offense to Democrats across the country. It's never about the voters for me. It's always about the institutions.
Right.
I think one of the problems we run into is a lot of of vote shaming and attacks on the voters themselves. I don't want to make Democrats feel bad, because a lot of Democrats really do want the right thing, but the institutions are rigged against us. and they're rigged against us because of money, which means that we have to slip enough people, unless we manage to somehow replace a party, but assuming the Dem-Enter thing works, if we can replace enough people to change those rules, then we can write the donor class out of the equation. They'll continue to run their propaganda in the media, but we can basically take them out of the halls of Congress. And if we can do that, we can start attacking a lot of these systemic issues. And I think the best way to get there is to find enough candidates willing to run on the right kind of rhetoric that can sway those swing voters and the people who are left out. I know a lot of people who are voting for me that normally wouldn't either, that don't see the parties represent them. And I get that. I mean, if you focus on, if your focus is things like interventions or the economy, then there's not much difference between the parties. There are huge differences between the Republican and Democratic Party, but it's primarily on social issues, and on like a basic relation to power. I mean, one is clearly more authoritarian than the other, and clearly more opposed to a lot of fundamental rights. But on a lot of key issues, there's not as much daylight as I would like between them. And we can draw in more people, but as an electoral strategy, that's a lot harder to reach and to motivate people who are already disillusioned with the political system. Oh, I'm a political candidate calling up. Sorry, I'm not interested. And they're already checked out. It's hard to kind of get past that. You can, but it's it's a slow burn. And you have to kind of like build up a lot of like word of mouth. No, this person's different. This person's different.
Either way, it's a slow burn. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, either way, I mean, everything you described is also a slow burn.
I'm well aware. Yeah.
And the issue too is that the climate is collapsing, and we don't have a lot of time to mess around.
I get you there. But we also don't have a lot of like shortcuts available to us.
There are none. The closest thing to a shortcut we have is kind of, what you're doing and what people around in communities are trying to do, which is build a movement in our backyard. Mm-hmm. That's the closest thing to a shortcut we have. Now, that's not just through electoral politics. That's through a lot of other means, activism,
street
protest,
politics are absolutely important. Yeah, there's no way to do what I'm doing without street politics. They have to work together, but on their own, neither of them can do it. And that's one of the things that we've often missed. What we needed to do is in order to take things like Occupy and make them work. I mean, we could have built on things like, I don't know, the 1990s anti-globalization crowd there, the battle in Seattle, that kind of stuff, because the way that a lot of those deals were written to favor multinational corporations and not us. There was a lot of solidarity there, all across the political spectrum on that issue. But we didn't manage to translate that into electoral politics at all. It stayed on the street only, and it'll fizzle. And vice versa. If you were to try and build up, get a particular candidate in, but there's no movement behind them. There's no strength on the street. You're not going to sustain that momentum.
Right.
We have to be able to build on each other there.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news